Remember, earlier on I said, the same circumstance can affect two persons, whether it's the first half or second half of life, or a person with a moralistic heart or a grace-driven heart, and both arrive at different conclusions, right? What does that say about us? It's not so much the ethics out there in the world. It's our anthropology. It's our mindset, heart set, history. As we said, you can, given an ethical dilemma, 5 years ago you may have responded in one way, but today you'll respond in a different way. What changed? The ethics of the problem? No, you did. So you know how complicated that makes things? If we ourselves are moving targets, can you imagine how we solve real problems in life if we don't pay attention to who a person really is? Right? That is why, remember, when we talk about ethics, you cannot just focus on right and wrong. You have to focus on a person's history, like your personal history. Okay? And concepts of the human being, you have to understand, in the 20th and 21st century, has been changing. How we understand the human person has changed even theologically. For example, because of biology and the neurosciences, even Christians are beginning to take biochemistry more seriously. We are beginning to take the neurosciences more seriously. Once when people committed suicide, what did they used to do? In the medieval times, they would bury them in the middle of a cross street. Why? So that their souls would not rest. Today, if you commit suicide, like Matthew Warren, he has a mental illness. Try using mental illness in theology 100 years ago. They would say you are nuts. See, what does that tell you? The sciences have even altered the way we view one another and how we even view our weaknesses and strengths. Did a person really do that because he intended to do such and such? Or was there a neurological predisposition in that direction? So we are talking of only the past 2 decades. And by the way, even in the neurosciences, they are trying very hard to understand themselves. If you've been to their conferences, it's still in its infancy. So, concepts of the human person is changing. In Florida, for example, for murder, murder cases, you can now bring in neuroscience, neuroethicists. How do you like that? For capital cases. Isn't that interesting? So that, even in our legal system, our neuro condition affects guilt. How do you like that? A person did such and such, not because they wanted to do it, but because they had no choice. They were predisposed. So just be aware that because our conceptions of the human person is shifting, ethics will be shifting as well. So just be aware of that one. Okay? Now, let me go back thousands of years to the time of Plato, just so that we can highlight a few classical conceptions of what a human being is. Plato, in his second book in Plato's Republic, he talks about a very famous case study known as the Ring of Gyges. The Ring of Gyges. What's the story about? Well, Gyges has an ancestor who is a shepherd, and then what happens is there is an earthquake, things fall apart, and then he walks into the cave and finds a dead body, and then on the dead body he finds a gold ring on the corpse. He takes that ring and then he puts it on his own finger, and he notices something, and that becomes, just like Greek stories, it becomes an object lesson and a big lesson, and a debate comes out of all of that. What's the debate? Well, it turns out that if he turns the ring on the inside, he becomes invisible. He becomes invisible. So, he has now acquired a new power. What's the new power? To do injustice and not suffer the consequences. Okay? Now, Glaucon, who is the guy engaging with Plato, makes this argument. He says this. He makes this argument and he says this. Imagine if you have two persons, he says. A good person, back then they didn't call them good, they called them just. If you have a just person and an unjust person, and you gave them both rings, right? Glaucon's conclusion is, if you give a person unlimited power, for example, to do evil and not get caught, even the good person will be corrupted. Okay? Given the opportunity to get away with it in an emergency situation, I can understand if an unjust person does injustice with it. Right? So, he says that both, even the good person, will succumb to evil. Why? Glaucon argues that because it is in the heart of every human person. If you are given unlimited power, you will choose evil. Wow, interesting, isn't it? So, Glaucon already alludes to what the religions of the world but already believe in. What do we call that? Human depravity. Human depravity. Simply by mere observation. Just look at ourselves, look at humans around us, right? Or our sin nature. Now, people say, well, Buddhism doesn't believe in sin, right? Well, not true. We may not use the same vocabulary, but if you're a Buddhist, you are trying to get rid of what? Wrong desires. What do we call that again? Some call it sin, right? What are you spending the rest of your life trying to run away from? In other words, there's something inside us that is not right. So we get that. In the Old Testament, we get that, right? The Greeks figured that one out too. So Plato, not sure whether to do this. Plato's answer was this: that is why we need to build character. Comes close to Aristotle, right? So he draws a picture for all of us. Some of you know the story of Plato's cave. We won't talk about that one. We are focusing on something else. He says, if you look at every human person, we all have a soul. Here's a picture of a soul. A soul is like a charioteer, a man on a chariot. The driver, I put a picture in, no, just for the heck of it, right? The driver of the chariot is reason. There are two horses. One horse is, okay, you can call it spirit or emotion, same thing. The other horse is your appetite or your desire, same thing, okay? Our desires often pull us in one direction. For example, if I can be invisible and get away with it, Glaucon tells the story of the man trying to seduce the king's wife, for example, using that ring. Because why? You must have at all costs. But reason is the one reigning in our passions, our desires. Or emotions, or our spirit may go overboard. Reason brings everything. So, when you have reason who can control both the spirit, emotion, or desire, appetite, it leads to the fourth quality. What do we call that? Justice. That is Plato's conception of a just person living in a just world. But again, you don't have to bother so much about that one. I thought for those who might be curious about these kinds of things. But what else did Plato say? Plato made an interesting comment about human nature. He didn't conclude about whether a person is naturally evil. But he did say one thing. A person can commit evil in their imagination. It's pretty, and it should be okay, as long as they don't do it in reality. A person can lust, commit adultery, do all kinds of stuff in their imagination, as long as they don't do it. So, most of us today would actually agree with Plato. Why? Because our judicial system only considers actual injustice. They are not held responsible for what they think. At worst, it is motive, right? That much. But beyond that, they cannot judge you on your imagination. So our legal system today is predicated on that belief. So our culture has certainly agreed with Plato up to this point. But here's why we are doing Christian social ethics. Remember the qualifier Christian. Because then you have to ask yourself, what do we as Christians bring to the table? Right? What do we believe that is somewhat different from Plato? Well, Jesus says something very different on this matter. Jesus tells us that sin comes through thought and our imagination. Right? From the Christian perspective, imagination gives us the power to do real injustice and also brings harm to the soul. For the same reason that Plato believed that the doing of injustice brings harm to the soul. Now, unlike Plato, the Christian notion of sin extends to the imagination, because it is in our imagination that our human nature is, to some extent, formed. And it is in that place where it can get perverted. Okay? Now, I mentioned Plato, but let's fast forward a few centuries. Let me use an example of an economist. Her name is Beatrice Webb. Some have not heard of that name. She and her husband were the founders of the LSE in London, the London School of Economics. She started out as a Marxist. She wrote about what she believed regarding human nature, and this is what she writes. She, like many, have an incredibly positive view of human nature. In other words, you've heard that question. Are children born good or bad? That kind of a question. Some would argue, the Confucianists would say they are born good. Others, like Christians, would say, yeah, have you been a parent before? Right? So we answer differently. But Beatrice Webb, here's the quote. It's in your notes. This is what she says. In my diary, 1890, I wrote, I have staked all of the essential goodness of human nature. I have staked all on the essential goodness of human nature. In other words, I have predicated all my economic theories on the fact that human beings are basically good. But now, 35 years later, I realize how permanent are the evil impulses and instincts in us, and how little they seem to change, like greed for wealth and power, and how mere social machinery will never change that. We must ask better things of human nature, but will we get a response? No amount of knowledge or science has been of any avail, and unless we curb the bad impulse, how will we get better social institutions? Bottom line, she changed her mind about good human nature. All right? Now, I want to talk about then what, from the Christian perspective, reshapes our ethical landscape. Right? I gave you a whole passage from Deuteronomy chapter 30, but in the interest of time, I don't have time to go through that. Let me summarize it for you. The book of Deuteronomy, Deuteronomos, means second law. It's basically a nicer way of explaining the law. Why? Because it was Moses in his dying days giving sermons. His sermons were collected together and they formed the book of Deuteronomy. So what a person says when he is close to his end, it means something, right? So, in a nutshell, what does he say in the book of Deuteronomy? Well, it is this. If you follow God's laws, God's rules, you will be blessed. In fact, the promise is that you won't even have hungry people among you because of how you run your economy, how you live through the Sabbath and collect 1/10 and give that and spread that around and things like that, right? But if you choose not to obey, you will be cursed, or the language of the curses and all of that. You will have diseases, you have all of that. So in all of Deuteronomy, we see both at play. I promise you I will bless you. Is that unconditional? And that's going to be a very important question for all of you. Is that unconditional? That God wants to bless us. Okay, what about the curses? That God will curse us if we don't follow. Is that unconditional or conditional? See, how we answer both questions will divide us into conservatives and liberals. Okay? Now let me move on. In spite of giving us both, there is sort of a tone in Moses' voice. He looks down the corridors of future history and he's just shaking his head, you're not going to make it. In Deuteronomy, you are not going to make it. Now, and yet he senses something, because what Moses does is that he harkens back to the covenant that God made with Abraham, and we'll come to that in a moment. Okay, I copied an image for you in your notes by Jacob Needleman. He wrote a very famous book not too long ago. Why can't we be good? This social theorist asked one of those what's that elephant in the room kind of question, right? What question did he ask? He said, do you realize that in our universities and at our institutions of higher learning, seminaries, or whether it is our political theories, every department talks about resolutions to make this a better world, a better client, how to resolve the problems of your client. And you have large, enormous ethical literature that help people become better people. We have great programs at the United Nations to end human trafficking. Right? And we have vast amounts of research to help people become better people. And yet, what's the big elephant in the room? Well, we have a very simple problem. Because we all know the right things to do, and yet why is it we can't get better? It's that simple. Why are we not getting better? That's the whole point of his book in a nutshell. We have all the answers. We have social theorists, political theorists, theologians, ethicists telling us how to live better lives. But look at the evidence. Are we actually getting better? No. Why are we not getting better? Right? So, that's the big question. He says, isn't that the more interesting question, rather than keep churning out new answers to create a better world? Or another book, Hope Has Its Reasons, by Becky Pippert. She took a class in psychology at Harvard University, and they were brainstorming a case where there was this man whom they concluded hated his mother. But he didn't know it, and it was distorting his life. So she raised her hand and she asked, how is the therapist going to help him forgive his mother? And the professor, to the shock of the class, said, that is not therapy. That is not therapy. Because if you are looking for a forgiving heart, you are looking in the wrong department. Right? You are looking in the wrong department. So that is what Jacob Needleman is saying. We know what to do, but we are powerless to do it. And now we are talking of our very best in our culture. Right? So, our universal human problem. I think we can now bring everything and summarize everything. Our universal human problem. We know what to do, but we are powerless to do it. Right? Okay. Let's introduce you to two things scripturally. The circumcised heart and the covenant of God. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 6. The Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants, so that you may love him with all your heart, with all your soul, and then you will live. So this is what Moses is saying in the middle of Deuteronomy. On the one hand, as we said earlier on, here are the laws to follow. If you follow, you will be prosperous. Do good, get good. Do bad, get curses. Get bad. And yet he shakes his head, you're not going to make it. And in the middle of all of that mix, the Lord himself will circumcise your hearts. So you see a dilemma and an implied solution. It is not going to come from you, because something is going to happen that is going to change your behavior. But it's not you. The Lord himself is going to do it. Wow. So what's happening over here? Okay, let's begin with the heart. In our modern reckoning, we associate heart with emotions. I love you with all my heart, meaning emotions and all of that. But that's not in Jewish anthropology. In Jewish anthropology, the heart is the seat of the soul. It is the center of our intellect, our imagination. It is the center of our reasoning capacities. So when a Jewish person says heart, that is what it means. It's not your feelings alone. So that is why Proverbs will say, guard your heart, out of it comes the issues of life. Out of it comes your interpretation of everything else. So that is our heart. So that is the seed of our soul that God is going to circumcise. So some have asked then, circumcision of the heart. Okay, already in the Old Testament we have circumcision as a physical reality. But in Deuteronomy, God throws in this circumcision of the heart thing that is in the future, because it says God will. That is a future thing, while the everyday circumcision to show one's covenant, Jewish covenant with God, is again the cutting off of the foreskin, right? So what does circumcision of the heart mean? Okay, what is circumcision of the heart? Okay, again, we don't have too much time to do exegesis. Let me just shrink all. If you are in my systematic theology classes, this may sound familiar. So if you've been in those classes, bear with me, okay? What does circumcision of the heart mean? Not, on the one hand, we have to obey God, correct? On the other hand, we may not want to. Or we may be forced to. So what is circumcision of the heart? In a nutshell, it is following the laws and the commands of God, not because we have to, but because we want to, and because we love to. The best way to illustrate this is in a hymn that John Newton wrote, known as his famous Olney hymns. He puts it in this way. Okay, so watch this, okay? On the one hand, we have our duty. Many of you know Christian duties, right? On the other hand, we have our pleasure, correct? Meaning our emotive life and all of that. And for many of us, emotively, or in our pleasure sense, we don't want to follow God because it doesn't feel pleasurable for some reason. But on the other hand, we have our duty side. On the other hand, we have our pleasure side. So this is what John Newton says. I love it. Our duty and pleasure, though opposite before, since we have seen his beauty, are joined to part no more. That is a picture of a circumcised heart. I mean, I'm using aesthetics right now, literature and all that, okay? But that's the best way to communicate it. In other words, there is something that happens inside that makes following God not a have to, but a want to, or I love to. See the difference? And they are very different animals. The end result can look the same, but the motivations behind are different. So, what is this? This is a new heart. Now think about it. We talked the other day about missing the middle step, about, when you meet someone, you fall in love with them, you're going to cook for them for the rest of your life. But if you insist that on a new couple, you're going to break down. Why? Well, here's why. In moralism, what is moralism? If a person does not have a changed heart, and you tell the person, obey God in this, do that, serve Him, you have to love your enemy, you need to be good, you ought to do this, you need to do that, it is going to be tiring after a while. We have seen many Christians burnt out because the doing is the result of an untransformed heart. And it leads to exhaustion, and it leads to, if they succeed, pride; if they don't succeed, guilt and condemnation. It's a no-win game. Okay? It's a no-win thing. Now, this circumcised heart is a reality. There are many ways to describe it in the Bible. Ezekiel, for example, talks about the exact same thing, but he uses different vocabulary. I will turn your heart of stone into a heart of flesh so that you will and want to obey. But notice that it is so different from the Mosaic law commandments, which is what? Do this, you'll be blessed. Don't do this, you'll be cursed. It's different because the burden seems to be on God, not us. In Ezekiel, I will turn your heart of stone into a heart of flesh. In Deuteronomy, what does he say? I will circumcise your heart. It is as if we look forward, if you are living in the Old Testament, through the corridors of history, there's at least these two realities where God initiates something that you don't quite know what to make of, but it is a God-initiated reality. Okay? So, let's put that aside because I have just stipulated for you a problem in search of a solution. Right? What is the solution then? Because once you understand the solution, ethics takes on a very different picture. Right? Now, I ask you that question again. And let's come back to that. Put the question on one, put it aside for a while. We're going to look at the solution. Okay? But before that, the question is this. Do you believe that if you obey God, you will be blessed? How many of you believe that? Okay? Oh, not sure now. You will be blessed if you obey God. How many of you believe that because God is a God of love, God should forgive bad people or evil people? Should? Should? How many of you believe that because God is a just and fair God, that the worst serial rapists and murderers should be punished by God? Because God is a fair God. He must punish the worst among us, including serial rapists and child baby torturers. I'm trying to throw the words in. Okay. Right? Alright. So on the one hand, God says, okay, so here's the contradiction in the Bible and the tension that many Christians do wrestle with, and I feel I do to some extent have sympathies with those in Judaism, because it's a seeming contradiction that cannot be resolved. Law or love? Law or grace? We talked about that from a different perspective the other day. The tension between love and justice. Now, you cannot deny, especially as evangelicals, when we go to the Old Testament, most of us don't like the curse verses, right? I will curse you third, fourth generation. We don't use those verses for our devotional. We go to the, for I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, kind of verses, right? And I will love you with an everlasting love. Now, what does that mean? It is everlasting. Is it predicated on us? Or is it predicated on Him? Okay, God, if I become a serial rapist, is your everlasting love for me? See, the minute we start asking tough questions, we're not sure what to do, because on the other hand, God says, I am a just God. I have to punish. So, that's why this becomes the central, irresolvable mystery in the Old Testament. Because on the one hand, if you read carefully, He does say, if you sin, I will never forgive you. I can produce many of those verses. You've read them yourself. I never will forgive you if you cross some line somewhere. You've read those, right? At the same time, What else? I cannot bless a disobedient people. Is that categorical? Sounds like a categorical statement to me, right? God cannot wink at evil because He is a holy God. Now, an earthly judge will be kicked out of the court if he couldn't practice law in a fair way, correct? And yet we know that God's people fail again and again and again and again. And on the other hand, God says, I will bless you unconditionally. There are so many verses in the Old Testament. So the question is this. The question is this, right? Are the blessings of God conditional or unconditional? See if you can answer that one.
Yes.
Why?
No, it's both.
Explain.
I'll let you do the work.
And that's what we wrestle with. So we could be a liberal and say, you know what, we should obey God, we should be good, but in the end, God is going to love everybody anyway, and He knows we're going to make mistakes. Right? So, love is primary, law and justice is secondary for a liberally minded person. Or a conservative minded person, what would they say? Law is primary, love is secondary. Yes, we have to follow the laws, but remember, they are the sheep and the goats. I never knew you. What is that? Law and justice first, love, and that's primary, and love is secondary. That is why even answering this question will divide you into the liberal conservative spectrum. That is why it's so important to understand this issue theologically and how it affects ethics and morality. Okay? So we can elevate one or the other, law or love. Yes?
When we talk about blessing versus punishment, how are we defining those? Are we defining those in human terms, or are we defining them in terms?
Oh, just take them on the terms of the Bible, which is before God and before one another.
If we follow God's laws, then He will bless us. That's true. And if we follow His commandment of accepting Christ.
So would you elevate law above love?
No.
So would you elevate love above law? Yes.
Yes, I think I would.
Love above law. Is that how the Jewish person sees that in the Old Testament? Right? So the reason I'm pressing this is I want you to feel the dilemma. Bree, you wanted to...
I was just going to say that I don't think we could ever fully follow the law because we're sinners. And so I think that His blessings are unconditional because we really never deserve them.
But He did say, if you are a disobedient people, does God keep His word? Yes.
But with the Shema, the love God with all your heart, your mind, etc., and then follow Christ saying that to love your neighbor as yourself. Love is stressed, and then
So you would elevate love over law.
Yes, but secondly, I also think the language of condition is very human, as opposed to the master plan. Does He consider conditions, or is that something we look for and try to judge what
No,
He's doing?
we try to keep this simple. We're just taking God at face value, and
That's
simply by what He is saying.
That's
Okay, one
easy.
question back. Yeah, and then we go.
There's this dichotomy. How do you state the sort of charge that it makes it sound like God is deliberately giving these people commands He knows they can't obey?
Ooh, that's a good question. What do you think? Any response to your own question?
I suspect the dichotomy.
Say again.
I suspect that this is a false dichotomy.
Okay. Well, if you say this is a false dichotomy, that is why I come back to the exegesis of Deuteronomy. On the one hand, if you're going to take God at His word, when He says, I will curse you and I will cut you off, you're either going to take that seriously or you're not going to take that seriously. And when He says, I will bless you and your future generations, you're either going to take that seriously or not seriously. Or what many of us do, we make one primary and the other one secondary. That's usually the typical decision that we make. Unconsciously, yes.
Aren't there like different layers of blessing though? So you can't really say if we're obedient, God will bless us. If you won't, because there's different like layers. There's like the supreme blessing, which is heaven. There's earthly blessings that when we obey God and we seek Him, He might reward us with something. And then there's like kind of a base level blessing where God just prevents like the whole world from just self-destructing because of His love for everybody.
Okay, don't forget, in Old Testament eschatology, they don't talk about heaven much. Everything is in this world. The ideas of heaven and all that comes in the New Testament. It is more of a this worldly existence when the future is mentioned in, for example, Ecclesiastes, the afterlife. The afterlife is a very small doctrine in Jewish theology. Okay, so they don't think a whole lot about the next world.
I guess I would promote like law above love in the sense that if you want the supreme blessings of God, don't sit back and hope that they'll come to you. Like take a step towards Him and kind of meet Him as He's coming towards you. Like He does kind of call you to come to Him.
Right. So I just want to bring this out just so that we can feel the struggle. You realize that either way you look at it, you have to give up something. And yes.
Is obedience to God always obedience to the law?
Well, that's a very good question. As some have asked, does God speak any other way outside of law?
Because Jesus was obedient. He loved God, but He was obedient. It talks about that.
Right.
Through His obedience, He will do His sacrifice.
Someone said so did the Jews. Okay, let's bring this because of the time. Okay. Deuteronomy 29 verse 13 hints at the answer already. By entering into the covenant today, He will establish you as His people and confirm that He is your God. What's the key? It's all here. Just as He promised you and as He swore to your ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What covenant that He promised to Abraham, Isaac? If you remember, in the answer is here, by the way. Genesis chapter 15. That's where the answer is. So, Moses is referring back to, remember the covenant given by, and this is where the solution is. Genesis chapter 15. The covenant is made. So God says to Abraham, I have blessed you. And what does Abraham say? What blessing? Can you confirm it? I want your signature. Can you sign on the dotted line, please? Right? I'm not sure if I'll get all the blessings. So what does God do? God says, okay, let's do something that archaeology has since confirmed. Take the dead animals. Right? What do we do with the animals? Cut them up, kill the animals, and line them up on the side of the road on the left and then on the right. So Moses is depending on this when he looks back to Abraham. So what is all of that? Well, that was the old way of securing, or in theology they call it cutting a covenant. Literally cutting a covenant. Usually it is the higher vessel that gets the lower vessel to do all the work, and the lower vessel has to walk through the covenant or the dead animals. So why does the lower vessel, like the USA maybe versus Canada, Canada will be the lower vessel, it's smaller. So the Canadian person who is cutting this deal has to be the one walking in the middle of the dead animals. Meaning what? All the terms of the agreement, if you do not do your part of it as the lesser vessel, you're going to look like dead meat, literally. Look around you. That's what is going to happen to you. Okay? So, here's the deal. God says to Abraham, these are the things you are supposed to do. These are the things I am supposed to do. So what does Abraham do? He lines the dead animals and then he pretends and he walks around the place. He doesn't want to walk through it. Question is, would you if you were him? It says darkness came down. And what happens? The birds come and he chases the birds away. That's all he can do. He doesn't want to walk through. He understands the implications. Right? If I walk through, I don't do my part, I will be struck down. And the weirdest, unthinkable thing happens. God, through light, walks through the covenant. What on earth is going on? What on earth is going on? Do you understand what is going on? Here's the interpretation to the dilemma we were talking about. So the shocker for the Jews is that, and for Abraham is, Abraham wasn't asked to walk through that. Now Abraham gets it. He actually understands what is going on even though he does not know how it could be. But we today understand why it can be. You know what it means? When God walks through that, here's two parts to the covenant. All covenants have two parts to it. What is the first part of the covenant? If I do not bless you, I will be cut to pieces if I don't do my part. Okay? But because he takes the place of Abraham, it's if you and your descendants cannot do their part, I will be cut to pieces too. It's all there. If I don't do my part to bless you, I will be cut to pieces. If you don't do your part, I will be cut to pieces. Centuries later, what happens? The dark clouds come back, and someone is on the cross. Why? We didn't do our part. And it's on him, not us. Right? That is the only way the dilemma is resolved. Are the blessings of God conditional or unconditional? Yes and no. It is unconditional because it is conditional. Why? We didn't do our part, and it is conditioned on us doing our part. We screwed up. He paid for it. He got cut to pieces. So it is unconditional now for us because God promised to bless us by Jesus dying on the cross. You see how Genesis 15, and you want to know, you go back to the New Testament, Paul talks about now we understand circumcision of the heart. Let me read for you the verse. Okay? Let's see. Colossians 2:11-12. In him you were also circumcised, in the putting off of the sinful nature, not with a circumcision done by the hands of men, but with a circumcision done by Christ, having been buried with him in baptism and raised with him through your faith in the power of God, who raised him from the dead. So, with his perfect life, Jesus completely fulfills the terms of the covenant. That is actually our part of the covenant we cannot keep. Right? So without Christ, the irresolvable tension of the New Testament cannot get resolved at all. So, conclusion, and let me close with this. Ethics. So, what is the distinctive of Christian ethics? You need to understand Christian theology, right? We've just done a bit of that. Christian theology is to recognize that our evil human nature, our sinful nature, is there. And yet God has already made provisions for it. God is the one who takes the divine initiative to transform our hearts from the inside out through the sacrificial vehicle of His Son Jesus Christ on the cross. Made all the way in Genesis, first book, right? And finally fulfilled in the New Testament. In other words, God has taken care of our inability to follow moral and ethical standards by Himself transforming our hearts from the inside out. In other words, if, okay, here's the if, we receive what He has done for us, His grace, His forgiveness and love, along with that comes supernatural power that progressively transforms our hearts from the inside out. If you don't have that, it is pure moralism, right? Or religion. What is religion? We obey from the outside in order to be blessed. Grace is the opposite. It is recognizing that we have already been blessed and forgiven. We have received the blessings of love, forgiveness, and grace, and that gives us the power to change. So that changes ethics completely. So it's not just saying right, wrong. It's how's the transformed heart process coming along? So let me close with this, again from John Newton. Remember what I said before? Our pleasure and our duty, though opposite before, since we have seen his beauty, are joined to part no more. And what is this beauty? To see the law by Christ fulfilled, and to hear his pardon voice transforms a slave into a child and duty into choice.